What's interesting about Houston's photography is the attention he gives to process in both capturing and developing the image. He creates a painterly effect by manipulating the background to add layers of dimensions. In this photograph, notice the way, by maneuvering the f-stop, Houston gives an impressionist blur to the image's background, which extends in depth beyond the viewer's gaze. There is a vanishing point right above the sharp focus of the primary subject's head, which heightens the distinctions between the primary plane of sight and the tertiary and infinite planes that are blurred by the physics of artist technique and distance. Although a photograph is actually a two-dimensional space, much like most canvas paintings, Houston uses not just realism, but a painter's eye to create illusion and depth. Think about the 15th and 16th century Renaissance paintings in which artists manipulated perspective to create more compellingly realistic images. Houston creates layers of visual surfaces that blur and fade into a vanishing point. The primary plane in this photograph is in the foreground with the subject leaning against the fence post. A secondary plane is defined by the Department of Justice sign and the leaves and branches of the tree, which, by the way, divide the photograph in half. This helps to create balance and symmetry. A tertiary plane is suggested by the pedestrian walking by, while another plane is defined by the bus in the background. The planes continue to layer as the viewer's eye moves past the light posts that get smaller as they blur into the distance. Houston exploits just these very basic elementary laws of optics and perspective to not only contextualize a singular subject within planes of multiple dimensions, he adds complexity to a simple image by complicating or problematizing its content. In this photograph, the singular subject is ideological. It speaks directly to Houston's ideals that individual hope is the key to mass resistance. Notice the way Houston creates depth through focusing on the single point perspective, or, again, a vanishing point, which is at the center of the photograph. In the background at the point center is Capitol Hill, where the Capitol building looks down at protesters. It's hidden behind the trees. Now, what's interesting about this photograph is its subject matter. Protesters are praying. This suggests that prayer is their form of protest. This reading is both actual and interpretive. Houston tells the story of how these protesters were told by authorities, police, that they could march, but they couldn't pray, and if they prayed, they would be arrested. It puts me in mind of the 19th century British poet Gilbert Chesterton's line in which he wrote, "One sees great things from the valley, only small things from the peak." And perhaps that's the statement Houston is making here. Houston was mentored by Gordon Parks, and when viewing Houston's photographs, we can see Parks' influence on Houston's work. Houston's An Open Door, for example, shares the mood and tone of Parks' Harlem Gang Leader, which was published in Life magazine in November 1948. The portraits are similar in their use of dark and shadows to visually divide the canvas. If you look at the Houston's image, you'll see to the left a darker space engulfs the figure that stands in partial silhouette to the right. The figure stares outside a door towards the photograph's only source of natural light. In the Parks photo of Red Jackson, or the Harlem Gang Leader, the figure stares outside a window rather than a door. Each subject seems to look towards escape and apprehension. Parks and Houston create symmetry in their balance of dark and light to manipulate values that move from left to right as the viewer absorbs the image's drama and details. Cracked windows or walls, for example, a discreet cigarette or beer bottle, they all suggest something important about the subject and his condition. While Parks shoots a bust of his figure at an angle that is slightly below the subject, Houston captures the entire body at an elevated diagonal that uses the room's corner. This angle helps to create the photograph's balance by dividing the image in halves. Gordon Parks uses the left edge of the window to create a similar effect. Both photographers focus less on capturing visual details about their subjects and use chiaroscuro to dramatize and highlight nuances in the environment. This maneuver creates tension that defines each of the photograph's individual settings. The effect also gives the viewer intangible insight into the figure's life, particularly his circumstance and living conditions. The environment therefore, for both photographers, becomes an important device that delineates itself as a primary subject of the portrait. Similar strategies in composition might be found in the work of other photographers, such as Cornel Capa. Houston's Bluest Eye and Children with Doll by Parks are also similar in that each artist has photographed children embracing a white doll. While the images make or suggest analogous commentaries, Houston's intervention is a dialectic that problematizes the discourse on white dolls and the self-image of black children. Although Houston's photograph in this presentation is black and white, a close examination suggests the figures in the photo have either hazel, gray, or blue eyes. Additionally, the young boy in the image appears to have dark blonde hair. Now, on the surface, the children are the subject and the doll is the object. From a different angle or ideological perspective, however, each image implies that the doll as metaphor is the subject and the children might be seen as objects in an American cultural discourse. This observation about children with dolls differs from other commentaries made by photographers who position dolls within a semiotic frame of American material culture. This includes Ben Shahn and his 1938 photograph, Daughters of Mr. Thaxton, and then, of course, there are Shahn's contemporaries, Theodore Young and Russell Lee. There are other similarities in artistic vision, of course, shared between Parks and Houston, particularly with photos such as Houston's series at Boston Garden. This collection includes portraits of Martin Luther King Jr. that evoke the image of Malcolm X addressing Black Muslim rally by Parks. Both artists skillfully use chiaroscuro and the balance between light and shadows to dramatize the subject and the darkness that engulfs each figure in partial silhouette. Each photographer also uses development techniques to process their images and to highlight the distinctions between dark and light. Parks gives more light to the photo to highlight Malcolm X in the darkness, while Houston uses light processing more sparingly to define his subject of Martin Luther King, not by light and not necessarily by shadows, but by darkness. In addition to Gordon Parks, however, in looking at Houston's body of work, we can see he references many influences which he combines and filters into his own style of photography. As his images demonstrate with versatility, Houston easily moves between the documentary and the more minimalist expressions of straight and abstract photography. Portraits like Blues and Guitar and Jodes, as shown here, bring to mind the craft of photographers working for the Farm Security Administration during the Depression era. These images are also reminiscent of the turn of the 20th century social documentary photographers. Images like Order and Chaos, however, represent a more contemporary genre of protest and social photography, as found in the civil rights imagery of Fred Ward, Danny Lyne, and Charles Moore. Gordon Parks once summarized Houston's work in an essay written for an unpublished manuscript. In this essay, Parks wrote, and I quote, "After a thorough look into Robert Houston's collection of photographs, one should understand what his camera means to him. Quite simply, it is an instrument to convey what he likes or dislikes about the world that surrounds him, and that camera is guided by his heart." End quote. If you would like more information on Robert Houston or would like to learn more about the James E. Lewis Museum of Art at Morgan State University, please pay us a visit at www.jelma.org.